What would you do if the only soul that ever saved you was thrown out of a plane at 25,000 feet?
Move!
Ethan Cole, a battle-hardened
It's over.
Navy operator, didn't hesitate. He leaped into a frozen storm to chase his K-9 partner, Shadow, through a blinding abyss.
Get to cover!
No backup,
Move!
no orders, just a promise. You won't fall alone. From a
Covering
deadly
fire, watch
ambush in
the
the
ridge.
Alaskan mountains, to a brutal fight on the ice, to a miracle reunion that defied every rule of nature, this is the true meaning of loyalty, courage, and faith. If their story moved you, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen, even in the coldest storms. A cold marine layer rolled silently over the Coronado shoreline, turning the early morning light into a pale silver haze that softened everything except the memories Ethan Cole carried inside his chest. Ethan stood alone outside his barracks, the damp ocean air clinging to his skin like a second, unwelcome uniform. At 34 years old, he looked every bit the hardened warrior the Navy had forged him into. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a powerful, compact build sculpted by years of relentless training. His muscles carried the density of a man who had hauled gear through jungles, deserts, and frozen mountain ranges. His jawline was square and tense, shadowed with dark stubble that grew fast on his naturally bronzed skin. His hair was a short, disciplined cut of deep brown, combed forward in a way that made his strong brow seem even more severe. His eyes, an intense steel blue, were alert even in stillness, scanning the empty training yard with the restless focus of a predator who had forgotten how to sleep deeply. They were the kind of eyes shaped by grief and battlefield losses, the kind that missed nothing, yet wished they saw much less. The man everyone saw was Sergeant Ethan Cole, one of the Navy's most dependable special operations soldiers, the kind who followed orders with unbroken precision and carried out missions with near-mechanical efficiency. But beneath the impenetrable armor of discipline lay a quieter truth. Ethan lived with a scar deeper than any on his body. Years ago, he had failed to save someone he cared for, and the guilt had hardened into a permanent knot in his chest. It shaped every action he took, every relationship he avoided. His teammates described him as steady, stoic, and brutally reliable, yet distant. A man who always carried himself half a step away from any emotional closeness. The only being who had breached his defenses was Shadow. Shadow moved at Ethan's side like a living extension of his will. The Belgian Malinois was 4 years old, in the prime of his working life, with a dense coat of dark sable fur that glistened even in low light. His build was lean but powerful, muscle rippling under his coat like a coiled spring. His ears stood tall, always alert, and his amber gold eyes were sharp with intelligence. Shadow's movements were quiet, purpose-driven, the gait of a creature trained for precision and battle. He was a military working dog bred from generations of elite bloodlines, trained to detect explosives, track enemies, and engage on command with lethal accuracy. But more than that, he had become Ethan's anchor, the one presence that steadied him during the long stretches of silence after the missions ended, and the world grew unbearably quiet. Ethan rested a hand on Shadow's head, feeling the reassuring warmth of the dog's fur. "Ready to work, boy?" he muttered, his voice low and roughened by fatigue and unspoken worries. Shadow didn't bark. He simply leaned into the touch, tail swaying once as if to say he was ready for anything, so long as Ethan was beside him. That silent loyalty loosened something in Ethan's chest every time, reminding him why he still fought. Today's briefing, however, carried a sense of weight he couldn't explain. The air felt wrong, too still, too quiet. His instincts, sharpened by years in war zones, prickled beneath his skin. Something was coming. Inside the operations building, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly over polished floors. Ethan's boots echoed through the hallway as he walked with the erect posture born of strict military discipline. Every movement he made was controlled, economical, and purposeful, the habits of a soldier who had spent more years deployed than at home. Shadow trotted next to him, perfectly in sync. In the briefing room, 2 other team members were already seated. The first was Corporal Mason Briggs, a sturdy man in his late 20s with cropped blonde hair and the rugged, square build of someone carved from farm work before he ever touched military training. He had an easy grin, friendly eyes, and a warmth that made him well-liked among the unit. Mason lacked Ethan's reserved nature, but he respected it, speaking to Ethan with a mix of caution and admiration. The second was Specialist Owen Hale, a lanky communications expert with short black hair, pale skin, and dark circles under his eyes from too many nights spent hunched over screens. Hale was brilliant, too brilliant for his own good, and had the twitchy nervousness of someone whose mind never rested. His long fingers tapped rapidly on the table as he monitored incoming intel. Both men greeted Ethan with nods, respectful, restrained, shaped by the unspoken hierarchy of experience. Ethan returned the nod as he took his seat, Shadow settling loyally at his feet. Commander Rowan Pierce entered moments later. He was a tall man in his 50s with iron-gray hair, piercing hazel eyes, and a face lined with the weight of too many difficult decisions. His build was still strong, though slightly softened by age, and his posture radiated authority. Rowan had been Ethan's superior officer for years, and though he trusted Ethan deeply, he also carried the burden of knowing how the younger man's past tragedies had hardened him. Rowan didn't waste time. "We've received satellite pings of suspicious movement along the lower Alaskan range," he said, his voice gravelly. "A reconnaissance team is required. Ethan, you'll lead. Briggs and Hale will support. Shadow will accompany." Ethan nodded. "Understood, sir." Rowan clicked to the next slide on the projector, revealing maps of dense forests and rugged mountains dusted with winter snow. "Intel suggests that a fringe mercenary group known as North Viper has resurfaced in the region. Their leader," Rowan's voice tightened slightly, "is Victor Resnick." The room stiffened. Even Shadow let out a low rumble. Resnick. The name alone was enough to reopen wounds Ethan had tried to bury. 5 years earlier, Resnick had orchestrated a weapons smuggling operation targeting American allies. Ethan's team had intercepted the operation, resulting in a violent firefight across a snowfield. Resnick escaped, but his younger brother and several of his men didn't. Intelligence suggested Resnick blamed Ethan personally for the deaths. Ethan's jaw clenched. He spoke calmly, but the steel in his voice was unmistakable. "What's Resnick doing in Alaska?" Rowan shook his head. "No confirmed objective yet, but if he's resurfaced, he's planning something. This mission is recon only, no engagement unless absolutely necessary. We don't know his manpower or equipment." Ethan absorbed the information with a soldier's stoic acceptance, but inside, a cold weight settled heavily in his gut. Resnick was a ghost he had hoped never to face again, a man with a cruel strategic mind and a taste for psychological warfare. If he was back, it wouldn't be for something small. The team prepared quickly, each member efficient and focused. Ethan checked Shadow's harness, tactical gear, and comms devices with meticulous precision. His fingers moved in practiced patterns, verifying clips, straps, and sensors. Shadow remained still throughout, patient and trusting. Mason approached Ethan while loading equipment. "You think Resnick's really out there?" he asked quietly, his expression more serious than usual. Ethan didn't look up. "If the intel says he is, then yes." Mason hesitated. "You ever run into him before?" Ethan paused for the briefest moment, hands stilling. His voice dropped lower. "Once, years ago." He doesn't forget. The flight to Alaska was long, cutting through shifting cloud layers and merciless winds as they entered remote terrain, untouched by civilization. Snow-covered ridges stretched endlessly below them, like the spine of a white beast. When they finally inserted into the forest using ropes from the helicopter, the cold hit them with brutal force. Ethan adjusted his gear, senses alert as the smell of pine and frozen earth seeped into his lungs. Shadow lowered his body, nose twitching, ears rotating in precise scans of the environment. They moved silently through the dense woods, their breath small clouds in the frigid air. Ethan's mind remained razor-sharp, toggling between tactical awareness and the quiet fear coiling deep within him. He had faced enemies before, but Resnick had a talent for making battles personal, for turning missions into nightmares. 3 hours into the recon, Hale whispered urgently into the comms. "Movement, east slope. Small heat signatures. Can't identify numbers." Before Ethan could respond, Shadow stopped abruptly. His body stiffened, hackles rising as he stared into the trees. A soft growl vibrated in his chest. Ethan drew his rifle. Eyes up. Shadow's picking something up. Branches shifted. The forest went unnervingly silent. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the air. Muzzle flashes flared from multiple hidden angles. Mason dove for cover. Hale hit the ground, panicking through comms, and Ethan pulled Shadow behind a fallen log as bullets shredded the bark above them. "Ambush!" Mason shouted, firing back. But Ethan already knew. North Viper had found them first. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping calmly into view as if he were strolling through a park instead of orchestrating violence. Viktor Resnik was a tall, lean man in his early 40s, with sharp cheekbones, pale skin, and cold gray eyes that reflected a lifetime of bitterness. His black hair was swept back neatly, contrasting his rugged, predatory features. His presence radiated menace and calculation, the aura of someone who enjoyed control and cruelty. He smiled, a thin, vicious curve. "Well, Sergeant Cole," Resnick called out, voice carrying effortlessly through the storm of gunfire, "it seems you're right on schedule." Ethan rose slightly, fury boiling beneath the surface. "Resnick!" he growled. Shadow lunged, but Ethan grabbed his harness. Resnick's eyes glittered. "I've heard much about your dog. Elite training, unshakable loyalty." His smile widened. "Let's test it." Before Ethan could react, a stun round detonated near them. The blast threw Shadow several feet, disorienting him. Ethan scrambled toward his partner, but gunmen closed in rapidly, forcing him back. Resnick signaled casually. Two mercenaries grabbed the weakened Shadow, injecting him with a sedative. Ethan's roar ripped through the forest, raw and primal, as he tried to charge forward, but gunfire pinned him down. Resnick stepped closer, tilting his head mockingly. "You took something from me years ago, Sergeant Cole. Now I take something from you." Shadow was dragged into the trees. "If you want him back," Resnick called out, his voice laced with venomous promise, "survive, then come find me." And just like that, the mercenaries vanished into the forest, taking Shadow with them and leaving Ethan kneeling in the snow, breath shattering in the cold air, hands trembling with fury and fear. He had lost Shadow, but he had not lost hope. Ethan stood slowly, rage crystallizing into something cold and unbreakable. He would find Resnick. He would get Shadow back. No matter the cost. The sky over Coronado burned in a muted orange haze, a fading sunset smothered beneath the heavy coastal fog rolling inland like a silent tide. Ethan Cole sat alone in the dim interior of his barracks, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. His gear was scattered across the room, rifle stripped down for cleaning, vest hanging open, boots unlaced, yet he stared at none of it. His mind was still trapped in the forest, where he last saw Shadow being dragged away by Viktor Resnick's men. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same scene again. Shadow's amber eyes trying to stay locked on him, despite the sedative, his body buckling under the weight of mercenaries, forcing him away. It sank into him like a hook, twisting deeper with each passing minute. The world outside the window felt motionless, unreal, as if time had been replaced by the constant dull ache in his chest. When the encrypted notification pinged on his secure tablet, Ethan didn't move at first. The sound felt foreign, wrong. When it chimed again, sharper this time, he reached for the device. His thumb unlocked the military-grade encryption. A single message appeared, marked from an untraceable sender. No text, only a video file. His pulse spiked, adrenaline flushing his veins. He hesitated for a moment. Then he pressed play. The screen exploded with motion and engine noise. A cavernous aircraft interior filled the frame, an old military cargo plane rattling under turbulent winds. In the center of the ramp stood Viktor Resnick. Even in the grainy footage, Resnick looked composed, almost regal in a disturbing way. He wore a dark thermal jacket, fitted tactical pants, boots laced with the meticulous precision of a man who respected both function and cruelty. His pale face seemed unbothered by the cold air whipping through the open ramp behind him. His sharp cheekbones cast angular shadows across his skin. Gray eyes, cold as Arctic ice, stared directly into the camera. Next to him, chained to a thick cargo ring on the ramp floor, was Shadow. Ethan's breath caught. Shadow's head was low, his ears flattened, sedative still lingering in his muscles. His thick sable coat ruffled in the wind. The chain connected to his harness was pulled so tight the metal links trembled. Resnick crouched beside the dog, gripping his muzzle firmly, yet almost gently, like a twisted parody of affection. "Sergeant Cole," he began, voice unnervingly calm, "I trust this message finds you alert." Resnick tilted the camera so the view expanded behind him. Beyond the open plane ramp, the world outside was a violent swirl of dark clouds, snow spiking through the turbulent air like shards of glass. Thunder flickered in distant flashes, a massive Arctic storm. Resnick continued, "Your dog is resilient, Admirably so. But resilience means nothing when gravity and nature are invited to the table. His smile sharpened like a blade. In 48 hours, this plane will cross the northern storm belt. When we reach the peak of the polar front, I will unfasten his chain. He tapped the metal ring lightly. And release him. Perhaps you will be fast enough to watch him fall. Perhaps not. Shadow struggled weakly, letting out a low growl, but the sound was swallowed by the engine roar. Resnick's eyes gleamed. You took my family from me, Sergeant. Now I take yours. The ramp behind him tilted slightly as the plane shook. Ice crystals blurred the camera. 48 hours. Do try to entertain me. The video cut to black. Ethan froze, unable to blink, unable to breathe. The silence afterward was crushing. It felt as though a fist had closed around his throat. Anger surged through him, sharp, blinding, all-consuming, followed by a colder, more dangerous resolve. Shadow wasn't just a military partner. He was the one thread holding Ethan's fractured world together. Losing him would snap everything. Ethan stood abruptly, chair scraping back. He knew what he had to do. He grabbed his tablet and stormed out of the barracks, boots thundering against the pavement as he marched toward the command building. Commander Rowan Pierce was in his office when Ethan burst in. The older man's stern face tightened as he looked up, brow furrowing beneath his graying hair. "Ethan," he said sharply, "I didn't authorize you to—" "I need a flight team," Ethan cut him off, slamming the tablet onto the desk and playing the video. "Resnick has Shadow. He plans to drop him into a polar storm. I can't sit here while—" Pierce raised his hand for silence as he watched the footage. His jaw clenched once. When the video ended, he leaned back, expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but absolutely not." Ethan's voice went dark. "Sir, this isn't a request." "You're not hearing me?" Pierce replied, leaning forward. His hazel eyes hardened. "Resnick wants you to react. He's baiting you. This reeks of psychological warfare." "I don't care," Ethan snapped. "Shadow doesn't deserve—" Pierce slammed his palm on the desk. "Enough! You are a decorated soldier. You know better than to walk into a trap this blatant." Ethan's breath shook with fury. "Sir, he's going to kill my partner." "Your partner," Pierce said firmly, "is officially classified as MIA, and the risk level for retrieving him is unacceptable. You're grounded from all ops until further notice." Ethan stared at him, disbelief giving way to betrayal. "You're going to let him die?" "I'm going to prevent more deaths," Pierce replied, voice firm but not unkind. "You're emotionally compromised. You are not flying anywhere near Resnick's position." Two military police officers appeared at the doorway as if on cue. Pierce nodded at them. "Escort Sergeant Cole back to his quarters. Effective immediately. He is restricted from operational areas." Ethan didn't resist. They'd expect that. But inside, something hardened into steel. Pierce thought Shadow was a military asset. Ethan knew Shadow was family. He returned to his room hours later, after pacing the perimeter of the base like a caged predator. Exhaustion clung to him. But he couldn't sit, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the sound of Resnick saying, 48 hours. He didn't know how long he sat on his bunk staring into the dark, until a sharp, controlled knock at his door. Ethan's muscles tensed. Military police again? "Ethan," a quiet female voice whispered urgently. "Open the door, now!" He recognized it immediately. Ava Torres. He swung the door open, and Ava slipped inside, closing it quickly behind her. She stood 5'9", tall for a woman, with a powerful yet agile build forged from years in aviation and special ops. Her skin was olive-toned, smooth but marked with faint scars she wore like silent medals. Her hair, dark, thick, and usually tied in a tight regulation bun, was loose tonight, strands falling around a sharp, angular face built for focus. Her eyes were a deep brown, intense and full of restless purpose. There was no softness in them, only sheer determination. Ava Torres was one of the Navy's best tactical pilots, known for flying into conditions other pilots called suicide. Her reputation for fearlessness wasn't born from recklessness, but from a past filled with battles where hesitation meant death. "Ava, what are you doing here?" Ethan asked quietly. She stepped closer, lowering her voice further. "I heard about what happened, and I saw the lockdown order. I'm here because I owe Shadow my life." Ethan blinked. "Syria," he murmured. She nodded once. "In Syria, years ago, Ava's helicopter had gone down behind an enemy line. Ethan's team was miles away, pinned by crossfire, but he still sent Shadow ahead to find her through smoke and rubble. Shadow had located Ava, bleeding, trapped under debris, then shielded her with his own body until Ethan arrived. The memory was clear enough to sting. Ava inhaled sharply. "I don't forget debts, Ethan, and I don't abandon people who save me. That dog saved me. You saved me. So I'm going to help you save him." Ethan shook his head. "They locked me down. Pierce grounded me. There's no way past the—" "There is," she interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "Command just approved a high-altitude equipment test flight for tomorrow morning. They assigned me as pilot, and they assigned you as the payload specialist." Ethan stared at her. "You're lying," he whispered. Ava's lips tightened. "Rowan Pierce yelled at you in front of the entire operations wing. He had to enforce discipline publicly. But he also approved a flight that just happens to leave before sunrise, just happens to be unreported to the regular logs, and just happens to require a specialist who's currently grounded." She leaned closer. "He couldn't send you, but he gave you a door." Ethan's heart pounded. "There's no way he covered it that cleanly." "Old man's smarter than you, give him credit for," Ava replied. "But we don't have time. Resnick's flight plan, what we can piece together, puts him in the storm belt early tomorrow morning. If we leave in the next 20 minutes, we can intercept him." Ethan grabbed the nearest bag and began throwing gear inside. "What about security? They're watching my movement." Ava smirked, the expression of someone who had danced around regulation her entire career. "Let me handle that. Meet me at Hangar 6 in 10 minutes. Bring nothing traceable. And Ethan—" She paused at the doorway, her posture shifting into something steely. "If we do this, it's off the books. No backup, no air support, no extraction unless I make one. You understand?" He met her gaze. "I do." "And you still want to go?" "It's Shadow," Ethan said simply. "There's nothing in this world I wouldn't do." Ava nodded once and slipped out the door. Ethan packed fast. Thermal gear, harness, sidearm, multi-tool, emergency oxygen, high-altitude mask, survival pack. He moved like a man possessed, systematic and relentless. His mind replayed Resnick's face over and over, fueling something darker and sharper inside him. He slipped out of the barracks through a side exit, sticking to shadows like a ghost. Sirens didn't blare. No security shouted his name. For a moment, he wondered if Ava had overstated the danger. Then he reached the hangar. Ava was already in the cockpit of a gray C-130 Ghost transport. Engines thundering, lights dimmed. Her silhouette moved with precise confidence. Two security trucks barreled toward the hangar from opposite sides, headlights cutting across the tarmac. Ava shouted from the cockpit window, "Move, Ethan!" He sprinted across the concrete just as the hangar door alarms blared. The loading ramp was lowering, agonizingly slow. Ethan dove onto it, grabbing a cargo strap as the ramp sealed behind him. Inside, the aircraft roared forward. Security forces reached the runway, shouting and waving signals, but Ava was already pushing the engines into full thrust. The C-130 shuddered, wheels screaming down the runway. Ava's voice crackled through the internal comms. "Hold on, we're going airborne, whether they like it or not." Spotlights lit up the plane, security vehicles sped alongside them. And then, the nose lifted, the wheels left the ground, and the C-130 Ghost punched through the fog, disappearing into the night as the base shrank beneath them. Ethan strapped in, chest heaving, adrenaline surging with every heartbeat. 48 hours. Resnick had made a promise. Now Ethan was on his way to break it. The storm swallowed the sky long before the C-130 reached it. Clouds churned like violent ocean currents, twisting into towering dark columns that merged with sheets of ice-filled wind sweeping across the altitude. Inside the cockpit, Ava Torres gripped the control yoke with both hands, her jaw tight, her usually composed expression etched with ferocious concentration. The plane vibrated under the strain of the turbulence, every bolt and panel rattling as if the aircraft itself feared the monstrosity it was flying into. Behind her, strapped into a jump harness and wearing oxygen, Ethan Cole watched the storm through the small round window beside him. His chest felt constricted, not from altitude, but from the suffocating slice of dread running through him. The storm looked like a living thing, something ancient, merciless, and hungry. Its roiling white mass was a wall of chaos. Within it, somewhere, Resnick was waiting, and with him, Shadow. Ethan's fingers curled into fists. His bruised knuckles cracked. He forced himself to breathe evenly through the oxygen mask, but the rage inside him kept flashing in his eyes like lightning cutting through darkness. His mind replayed Resnick's taunting smirk, the chain, the open ramp, Shadow's weakened body dragged forward in the video. It ignited something primal inside him, something deeper than duty or honor. It was the instinct of a man who refused to lose the last piece of his world. Ava's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and controlled. Radar just picked up an anomaly to the northeast. No transponder, low altitude, heading deeper into the storm. It has to be Resnick. Ethan pushed himself up, steadying against the metal wall as the plane shook violently. Distance! 4 miles, Ava replied, her hands dancing over the controls, countering a sudden drop. And closing. The storm's messing with readings, but it's him. I'd bet my wings on it. Then take us in, Ethan said. That's the plan, Ava muttered, teeth gritted as she forced the aircraft to bank left into the heart of the white maelstrom. Snow and ice streaked across the windshield, thrashing in spirals. Thunder cracked somewhere so close it felt like the sky split open. Ethan secured his gear, thermal suit, oxygen line, high-altitude harness. He checked the buckles like a man preparing to run into gunfire alone, which wasn't far from the truth. Every movement was precise, guided by habit and desperation. You realize, Ava said, eyes flicking between the storm and the sensors, that once the back ramp opens, I'll only be able to keep us steady for a few seconds. I don't need more than that, Ethan answered, tightening a strap. Just get me close. Ava stole a glance at him. You're either the most loyal man I've ever met, or the most suicidal. Does it matter which? Ethan replied. Her lips curved into a grim, wry smile. Not really. Minutes passed in grueling turbulence until Ava suddenly cursed under her breath. There, visual, the silhouette of a cargo plane at our 10 o'clock. Ethan moved toward the side window again, squinting into the storm. A dark shape materialized through the swirling snow. A large aircraft, slightly smaller than theirs, its rear ramp already cracked open like a hungry mouth. A spotlight mounted near the ramp flickered in the wind, sweeping the clouds below. Resnick's plane. Ethan felt his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. Ava lowered the flaps, fighting the wind. He knows we're here. He's adjusting altitude. As if to confirm her words, Resnick's aircraft deliberately drifted lower, positioning itself directly above a darker section of the storm, where lightning flashed beneath the clouds like a burning sea. Ethan stepped toward the rear ramp and pressed the intercom. Open it. Ava didn't hesitate. Opening rear hatch. Good luck, Ethan. The metal ramp began to lower, wind immediately blasting into the aircraft like a freight train made of ice. Ethan braced himself, leaning into the roaring gale. Snow shot in sideways, stinging like needles against his exposed skin. On the horizon, a crack of lightning lit the sky with stark clarity. He saw Resnick. A tall silhouette stood at the edge of the opposing cargo ramp, coat whipping violently around him. Even from this distance, Ethan could see the pale cruelty carved into the man's angular face. His short, dark hair was slicked back by the wind, revealing sharp cheekbones and cold gray eyes that reflected no remorse, only satisfaction. At Resnick's feet was Shadow. The dog was chained again, weakened but conscious enough to struggle against the metal links. His fur bristled, teeth bared, but his limbs trembled with the lingering effects of sedation. When the spotlight on Resnick's plane swept downward, Shadow's outline showed clearly. A proud, powerful beast, brought low but not broken. Resnick grabbed the chain and yanked Shadow closer to the edge. No, Ethan whispered, voice breaking beneath the hurricane roar. Resnick lifted his arm in a mock salute, a final insult. Then he pushed. Shadow slid backward, paws flailing for grip, body twisting as momentum carried him over the ramp. The dog vanished into the storm-shredded sky. And Ethan didn't remember making a decision. His body moved before thought existed. He ran. He ran with the force of everything he had ever loved or lost. The wind hammered against him, trying to hurl him backward, but Ethan leaned into it, sprinting down the ramp as the harness lines rattled behind him. Ava screamed through the comm. Ethan, no! But he was already gone. He launched himself into the void. The first second was nothing but chaos. Wind slammed into him, flipping him backward. His body spun, tumbling through ice, snow, darkness. He tucked his limbs, forced his body to straighten, fought for control until he stabilized into a freefall posture. His stomach dropped as he plummeted deeper into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Air temperature at this altitude was lethal, carving through fabric layers and stabbing into his skin. His breath fogged inside the mask. Frost crept across his goggles like white veins. His eyes strained against the spinning darkness below. Nothing. The storm was a moving maze, shifting white walls and black chasms of cloud. He forced himself to stay calm. "Shadow, where are you?" he whispered into the wind. Lightning forked beneath him, illuminating the atmosphere for a split second. And in that frozen shard of time, he saw him, a dark tumbling shape far below, falling fast, limbs flailing helplessly in the violent air. Shadow. Ethan shifted his body into a steeper dive. The pressure increased instantly. His speed surged, wind screaming past him like 1,000 knives. The altimeter on his wrist beeped warnings. Oxygen hissed in his mask. His shoulders burned, his muscles trembling under the force of descent. The gap closed, slowly, agonizingly. Shadow twisted unpredictably, his harness strap whipping in random arcs, making the approach incredibly dangerous. If Ethan miscalculated by even a foot, he could hit the dog at terminal speed and kill them both instantly. Lightning flashed again. Closer now. Ethan reached out a hand, fingers shaking from cold and speed. "Come on, come on!" Another jolt of turbulence slammed into him, throwing him sideways. He fought the spin, arms wide, stabilizing again. He pushed through the resistance, diving with everything left in him. At last, he reached Shadow's level. Ethan grabbed for the harness strap. His glove slipped. He swore into the wind and reached again. This time, he caught it. His fingers closed around the nylon with a desperate strength born from fear and devotion. He reeled Shadow toward his chest, wrapping both arms around the dog and turning his own body into a shield against the fall. Shadow whimpered, pressing his head weakly into Ethan's chest as if recognizing him. "We're okay," Ethan gasped. I've got you, boy." But they weren't okay. Altitude, 7,000 feet. Too low, too fast. Ethan fumbled for the tandem harness clips. His right hand was going numb, fingers stiffening from the cold. He forced them to obey, guided blindly by muscle memory. One clip locked with a thunk he couldn't hear over the wind. Another refused to latch. His fingers slipped. He nearly dropped the carabiner. "Come on!" Ethan shouted into the storm. He tried again. His right hand failed him, trembling violently. He gripped the metal with his left hand, angling it with precision until, click, 2 clips secured. The third, if he failed it, the shock from the chute might rip Shadow away from him. He grabbed the final clip. His hand was almost useless now, shaking uncontrollably from cold. Lightning split the sky, white fire across black clouds. Ethan jammed the clip forward. Click, all 3 locked. Altitude, 4,500 feet. No time. He grabbed the ripcord, pulled. The chute exploded open above them with a violent snap. Ethan's body jerked upward, pain searing across his shoulders and back. Shadow yelped, pressed tightly against him. The parachute canopy fluttered wildly in the storm winds, but held. They swung downward, buffeted in wide arcs until finally breaking through a thinner layer of cloud. Below them lay a steep, snow-covered mountain ridge. Ethan braced. They hit hard, harder than he'd ever hit before. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. They tumbled across the slope, rolling violently until Ethan dug his boots into the snow, bringing them to a stop near a jagged rock formation. He groaned, every muscle protesting. His right shoulder throbbed, a deep, angry ache. His right hand throbbed with pain, as if frostbite were already rooting itself inside his bones. Shadow whimpered. Ethan forced himself upright, breath shaking. His goggles cracked, his mask half torn off. Snow stung his face. He looked down. Shadow lay curled awkwardly, one hind leg bent at an unnatural angle in the snow. "No," Ethan whispered, voice breaking. "Shadow." He crawled to the dog, gently placing a hand on the thick fur. Shadow licked his wrist weakly, the movement a mixture of pain and trust. "We're alive," Ethan murmured, gritting his teeth. "We're alive. I'm not losing you." But as he looked around, the storm clearing just enough to reveal towering cliffs and endless snow, he realized something undeniable. Resnick had not just tried to kill Shadow. He had dropped them both into a freezing wilderness where survival itself would be a battle. And Ethan, injured and nearly frozen, clutched Shadow close as the wind howled again across the mountain. The fight to save Shadow had only begun. The night on the mountain felt less like darkness and more like a slow suffocation. The cold wasn't merely a temperature, it was a relentless living force that pressed against Ethan Cole's bones, clawing through every layer he wore. The wind screamed down the slopes like wolves on the hunt, ripping clouds of frost off the snow and scattering them into the air like ghostly shrapnel. Ethan's breath fogged in front of him, the moisture freezing instantly on his beard. He cradled Shadow against his chest, eyes scanning the jagged terrain for any sign of shelter. He found one by instinct, a shallow indentation along a granite outcropping, barely deep enough to shield a human, much less a fully grown Belgian Malinois. But Ethan had no choice. He turned his body sideways and began digging with his one good arm, using the hooked edge of his multi-tool and his forearm as a makeshift shovel. Snow flew in broken clumps as he widened the hole, coughing against the sting of frozen air. Shadow whimpered once as the wind whipped around them. Ethan paused, looking down at him. Even weak and trembling, Shadow's amber eyes tried to stay focused on him. This dog, this partner, refused to surrender, even with a shattered leg, even after free-falling through a storm from thousands of feet above. "I know, boy," Ethan murmured, voice cracked. "Hold on just a little longer." His right hand was nearly useless. The cold had turned it into a stiff purple claw that responded only to pain. Every movement sent needles of agony up his arm, but he kept at it until the hollow in the snow grew big enough. He slid inside with Shadow, shielding him from the wind using his own body and the curve of the rock wall. The moment they settled inside the cramped space, Ethan got to work. He unrolled his emergency heat sheet, thin reflective mylar, and wrapped it around Shadow. With his left hand, he gently straightened the dog's injured leg. The break was high, near the hip joint. Not ideal, not survivable without stabilization. He whispered calming sounds, voice low, soothing, even though his heart felt like it was tearing. Shadow licked his wrist once in response, his breath warm and shallow. Ethan fumbled in his small pack, pulling out the two collapsible aluminum splints. His left hand shook violently as he positioned them along the leg. His right hand, half numb, half screaming, had to hold Shadow's thigh in place. "I'm sorry," Ethan rasped. "I'm so sorry, Shadow." He pulled. Shadow howled into the night, the sound muffled by the storm. Ethan clenched his jaw, tears freezing along the edges of his lashes. He fastened the splints with strips of torn thermal fabric, tightening them until they held firm. Shadow panted heavily, eyes unfocused. "You're okay," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "You're tough, tougher than me." When the splint was secure, Ethan curled around the dog again, using his body heat to keep him alive. He could feel the warmth leaving his own limbs. His right shoulder screamed from trauma. His hand was turning black. But as long as Shadow breathed, Ethan forced himself to stay awake, forced himself to stay fighting. Hours passed, or minutes. Time twisted in the cold. The storm finally began to thin. Silver dawn creeping across the horizon, with a pale light that revealed the mountain's imposing white vastness. Ethan blinked against the sudden brightness, shifting just enough to peek through the snow at the world outside their makeshift shelter. He froze. Far down the slope, figures moved, dark silhouettes cutting across the snow with practiced formation. At least 6 of them, maybe more, wearing matte black snow gear and carrying rifles. Their disciplined, predatory movements were unmistakable. Resnick's men. Ethan's muscles tensed, exhaustion momentarily forgotten. They had tracked him somehow, thermal sensors perhaps, or a beacon he hadn't realized was active on his gear, and they were coming fast. Shadow stirred weakly at the shift in Ethan's posture. Even half-conscious, he sensed danger. His ears flattened, a faint growl rumbling like distant thunder in his chest. "Stay," Ethan whispered, placing his hand gently on Shadow's neck. "You're not moving. I'll handle them." He forced himself out of the cramped hollow, the cold slamming back into him like a wall. He scanned the area, calculating the terrain. Jagged rocks, steep inclines, deep snow drifts, perfect for ambush-style tactics, if he could stay mobile. He checked his pistol. 15 rounds, 2 magazines. Not enough for a prolonged firefight. He crouched low, slipped between 2 rock formations, and moved parallel to the approaching team. His breathing steadied into a soldier's rhythm. His steps became careful, controlled. Ethan Cole was no longer a freezing, wounded man. He was a predator navigating his terrain. The first mercenary appeared above a snow groove 20 yards ahead. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with his thick winter mask concealing his face. He held his rifle tight to his chest, scanning the area with calculated sweeps. Ethan recognized the type immediately. Frontline muscle, probably ex-Spetsnaz or Balkan militia. Dangerous, but predictable. Ethan crouched behind a rock, waited. The wind shifted. The mercenary turned his head. Ethan fired once. The shot punched through the man's throat. He dropped silently into the snow. Ethan moved quickly to reposition, breath sharp in the icy air. Two more mercenaries closed in, alerted by the faint sound of the impact. They scanned frantically, but snow distortion and wind played tricks on their ears. Ethan slid along a ridge, aimed from a different angle, and fired twice. 2 shots, 2 kills. Their bodies tumbled down the incline, disappearing behind drifts. He didn't relish killing them, but they were obstacles between him and Shadow's survival. But as he ducked behind another boulder, a sudden metallic click echoed from the ridge above him. Another mercenary. This one was different. Lean, wiry, with a narrow face partially visible beneath his mask. His green eyes were sharp, calculating. The man moved with a quiet efficiency that screamed experience. His rifle was already leveled at Ethan's heart. He fired. Ethan dove sideways, feeling the bullet rip his sleeve and graze the skin beneath. He rolled behind a rock and fired back. The mercenary ducked behind a tree, repositioned, fired again. Snow exploded around Ethan. This gunman was skilled, too skilled to take lightly. Ethan crawled sideways, wincing as his injured shoulder screamed. He needed an angle, something to break the stalemate. He spotted a thin, overhanging ledge of snow above the mercenary, a fragile shelf. If he could, he fired at the ridge instead of the man. The snow cracked. The mercenary's eyes widened in recognition. Too late. Thousands of pounds of powder collapsed, burying him instantly. The avalanche roared down the slope, muffling all sound. Ethan exhaled, chest heaving. That made 4. 2 remained. He scanned the slope, senses sharp, a sudden crunch of boots behind him. Ethan spun around just as a massive figure charged him. A mercenary built like a bull, thick neck, heavy beard poking out from his mask, eyes blazing with fury. His rifle was slung behind him as he lunged, preferring brute force over bullets. Ethan raised his arm, but the man crashed into him like a truck, knocking him backward onto the ice. The world spun. Pain exploded across Ethan's back as his spine slammed into the ground. The mercenary grabbed Ethan by his vest, hauling him up with terrifying strength. Ethan saw the man's face clearly. Slavic features, scars along his cheek, broken nose long since healed crooked. The kind of man who'd survived too many fights to fear another. Ethan headbutted him. The mercenary snarled, releasing his grip just enough for Ethan to slam his knee into the man's ribs. A grunt. Ethan shoved him backward, but the giant recovered fast, swinging a massive fist that clipped Ethan's jaw. The blow sent stars across Ethan's vision. They grappled in the snow, rolling violently. Ethan's right hand was useless, pain slicing up his arm whenever he tried to grip. The mercenary wrapped an arm around Ethan's throat, squeezing hard. Ethan clawed at the man's mask with his left hand, ripping it away. Underneath was a weathered face with a square jaw, gray stubble, and a long scar beneath the eye. The man snarled like a beast, tightening the choke. Air cut off. Ethan's vision blurred. But he saw something, a glint of metal in the snow. His pistol. He twisted, lungs burning, shoulders screaming, and threw himself sideways. The mercenary tried to hold on, but the shift of weight loosened just enough for Ethan to reach out. His fingers brushed the grip. He grabbed it, twisted, fired. The mercenary spasmed, then collapsed lifeless into the snow. Ethan coughed violently, gulping air like a drowning man. His vision pulsed. His shoulder throbbed. His hand felt like it was dying. But he forced himself up. Shadow needed him. He staggered back toward the snow hollow, weapon ready. But he didn't get far. A cold, calm voice echoed across the mountain. "Well done, Sergeant Cole." Ethan froze. Victor Resnick stood 20 feet away, rifle trained directly on him. His dark winter coat billowed in the wind, revealing his tall, lean frame. His sharp cheekbones cast deep shadows across his pale face, and his gray eyes gleamed with victory. Frost clung to his short raven hair, but the cold didn't seem to touch him. Resnick looked almost serene. You've killed 6 of my men, Resnick said. Impressive, but this ends here. Ethan raised his pistol, aiming at Resnick's head. Resnick fired first. The bullet struck the snow inches from Ethan's foot, a warning shot. You're down to 1 magazine, Resnick murmured. I checked your gear before dragging your dog. I know everything you carry. Ethan said nothing, his finger tightening on the trigger. Resnick smirked. You think you can save him? You think you can climb down this mountain alive? You're injured. You're freezing. And your dog? Don't say it, Ethan growled. Resnick's smile widened. Is already halfway to dying. Rage flared in Ethan's chest. But before Resnick could fire, a blur of motion erupted behind him. Shadow. On 3 legs, dragging the splinted one behind, the dog burst from the snow hollow with a savage snarl, leaping onto Resnick's back. The force drove Resnick forward. He fell, dropping his rifle as Shadow clamped powerful jaws around his arm. Resnick screamed. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, punching Resnick in the jaw with his left fist. The man crumpled. Ethan grabbed Resnick's own rifle and slammed the buttstock into his face, knocking him out cold. Snow settled around them. Silence fell. Ethan panted, heart hammering. He turned to Shadow, who wobbled and collapsed into the snow, exhausted. Good boy, Ethan whispered, pulling him close. You saved me? He pulled the emergency locator beacon from his pack with trembling fingers and activated it. A flare of red light blinked, sending a signal into the sky. Minutes passed. Then, rotor blades thundered in the distance. 2 military helicopters swooped in over the ridge, snow blasting outward in a storm of ice. Ava Torres leaned out of the first helicopter, helmet on, eyes scanning desperately. When she spotted Ethan and Shadow, her expression broke into shock, then fierce relief. Hang on, Ava shouted. We've got you. Ethan wrapped his arms around Shadow as rescue teams sprinted toward them through the snow. They were alive. Against every odd. They were alive. The morning sun over the military medical base was thin and pale, filtered through the fog like a fragile promise. Ethan Cole opened his eyes to the sterile whiteness of the recovery ward and the faint hum of machines. The scent of antiseptic clung to the air, but beneath it he could detect something familiar. Shadow's fur, faint, warm, unmistakable. He turned his head with effort. His shoulder was strapped, his right hand wrapped in thick bandages, and his breath still carried the ache of exhaustion. But his eyes softened immediately when they found Shadow lying on a padded veterinary cot just a few feet away. Tubes ran from the dog's foreleg to a monitoring machine. His chest rose and fell slowly under the effects of anesthesia. He looked peaceful, too still. Ethan pushed himself upright, his injured shoulder sending waves of pain across his torso. A nurse hurried over, a young woman with light brown skin, sharp cheekbones, and dark hair tied in a tight bun. Her name tag read Nurse Delgado. She was petite, but moved with the efficiency of someone trained to multitask under pressure. Easy, Sergeant, she said, laying a gentle hand on his uninjured shoulder. You just came out of surgery yourself. You need to rest. How is he? Ethan rasped, ignoring her warning as he stared at Shadow. Delgado hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. He made it through the initial procedure. The orthopedic team stabilized the fracture, but... She exhaled softly. He's not fully out of the woods yet. His system took a beating, from the fall, the cold, and the shock. He needs time. Ethan swallowed hard. Shadow always fights. He'll pull through. Delgado studied his face for a moment, his hardened jawline, the deep-set hazel eyes still shadowed by the trauma of the mountain, the faint beard outlining his strong features. He looked like a soldier carved from granite, but cracked in places where only love had held him together. I hope you're right, she murmured before stepping away. Hours passed, or perhaps days. It was difficult to tell. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by flashes of storm clouds, falling snow, Resnick's cold stare, and Shadow spinning helplessly in the sky. But every time he woke, his gaze locked onto the rise and fall of Shadow's chest. It grounded him. On the 3rd morning, Ethan was awakened by the soft tapping of boots. A doctor entered the room, a tall man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair, a trimmed goatee, and a calm, commanding presence. The creases around his eyes suggested years of intense work under pressure. His uniform bore the insignia of a high-ranking military surgeon. I'm Major Dr. Simon Hallbrook, he said, arms folded. I oversaw your operation. How's the pain? Manageable, Ethan lied. How's Shadow? Halbrook pulled a tablet from under his arm and glanced at the readings. Still critical, but stable. There's something you should know. His temperature dropped lower than expected during surgery. We believe his body is fighting a secondary shock response. We're doing everything we can. Ethan inhaled sharply. I need to be with him. You already are, Halbrook replied. But you also need to understand something else. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. There will be a formal panel questioning your unauthorized deployment. Command wants to evaluate your mental fitness and whether disciplinary action is appropriate. Halbrook paused. You saved your dog. You subdued Resnick. You survived circumstances no human should. But the military isn't always kind to those who act outside protocol. Ethan clenched his jaw so tight his teeth ached. I didn't do it for protocol. I know, Halbrook said gently. That's why you need to keep your composure during the hearing. The hearing was scheduled 5 days later. Shadow's recovery remained uneven. Some mornings he opened his eyes and managed to lick Ethan's palm. Other times he drifted into a worrying stillness. Each setback twisted Ethan's insides with helpless fear. He spent every allowed hour beside Shadow, reading aloud softly or simply resting his forehead against the dog's, feeling Shadow's warmth, grounding himself against the tremors of doubt. On the morning of the hearing, the sky outside the window was a cold steel blue. Ethan stood before the mirror, adjusting the clean uniform that Avery, a young orderly, had brought him. His shoulder was still stiff, and his right hand was partially immobilized, heavily bandaged. His reflection showed a broad-shouldered man with a strong, disciplined posture, but eyes that carried storms. The scars along his cheekbone and jaw hinted at years of conflict, but it was the quiet intensity in his gaze that betrayed everything he had endured. He made his way to the hearing room, a small, nondescript office repurposed with a long table and 3 officers seated behind it. At the center sat Colonel Margaret Thorson, a tall, angular woman with silver hair pulled into a tight braid. Her expression was as sharp as her reputation, intimidating, precise, efficient. Her cold blue eyes missed nothing. Beside her sat Commander Riley, a dark-skinned man with a clipped beard and a calm, measured manner. To the left, Captain Howard Sloan, a man in his 50s with a weathered face and deep frown lines, reviewed a stack of papers with a tired sigh. Together, they formed the disciplinary panel. Sergeant Ethan Cole, Colonel Thorson began, we are here to review your unauthorized departure from base, theft of military transport, and engagement in an unsanctioned combat zone. The words felt like barbed wire tightening around his throat. Before we begin, state your intent. Ethan took a steady breath. My intent was to save my partner. Your dog, she corrected coolly. My partner, Ethan repeated, voice firm. My responsibility, my family. Riley leaned forward slightly, curiosity in his gaze. Sloan scribbled notes. Thorson's eyes remained icy. Explain why you chose to violate direct orders. Because if I didn't, Ethan said quietly, Shadow would have died alone, thrown from a plane thousands of feet above a blizzard. Sloan looked up. You had no proof Resnick intended to do that. I had a video, Ethan replied. A video that could have been doctored, Thorson retorted. A trap, as intel suggested. Maybe, Ethan said, his voice tightening. But to abandon him, to sit and wait while the clock ticked down, that wasn't an option. Thorson's gaze narrowed. You compromised national protocol and risked an international incident over an animal. A life, Ethan snapped before he could restrain himself. A life that saved mine countless times. Silence. Riley exchanged a brief glance with Sloan. Thorson flipped her folder shut. We will deliberate. You are dismissed. His heart pounded as he left the room. He returned to Shadow immediately. Nurse Delgado met him at the door, her expression troubled. Ethan, Shadow's vitals dipped again. He felt the world tilt. He rushed inside. Shadow was breathing fast, too fast, his body trembling under the blanket. Ethan knelt beside him, resting his bandaged hand against Shadow's cheek. Hey, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Shadow blinked slowly at the sound of his voice, but his eyelids fluttered with exhaustion. Dr. Halbrook entered, brows furrowed. We're increasing warm IV fluids and adjusting oxygen. This isn't unexpected, but it is concerning. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Please fight, buddy, please! Hours passed in a blur. Then, sometime past midnight, Shadow's breathing steadied. He opened his eyes fully, clearer, more aware, and nudged Ethan's arm weakly. He was still fighting. Still alive. Still Shadow. Ethan let out a shuddering breath of relief. The next afternoon, Colonel Thorson entered the room, her expression unreadable. Ethan stood slowly, ready for the worst. "The panel has reached a decision." She paused. "You acted without authorization. You violated command protocols." Her eyes shifted briefly to Shadow. "But in light of the unique circumstances, Resnick's capture, your exemplary service record, and the testimony provided," she inhaled, "you are cleared of charges, recommended for honorable discharge upon full recovery." Ethan stiffened in shock. "I'm being discharged?" Thorson's tone softened just a fraction. "You've given more than enough. The military agrees." Riley stepped forward, offering his hand. "You saved your partner. Most of us would have done the same, if we're honest." Sloan nodded. "Take the time you've earned, son." Ethan shook their hands, gratitude tightening his throat. 6 months passed. The world shifted from sterile hospital lights to the gentle golden haze of an Oregon autumn. Ethan stepped outside the small wooden cabin, tucked deep within a forest of towering pines. Sunlight filtered through the branches in warm ribbons. The scent of earth, sap, and lake water filled the air. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, the relaxed clothes of a man reconciling with peace. His right hand, though scarred and stiff, was functional enough to hold a mug of coffee. His shoulder still ached occasionally, but the pain no longer defined him. A soft thump sounded behind him. Shadow emerged from the cabin, tail wagging, coat glossy once more. He moved with a rolling gait, 3 strong legs and 1 rebuilt one, healed but forever changed. He no longer ran exactly as before, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. Ethan picked up a green rubber ball, Shadow's favorite. "You ready, partner?" Shadow's eyes gleamed. His body quivered with anticipation. Ethan threw the ball in a long arc toward the glittering lake. Shadow bolted after it, splashing into the shallows with a joyful bark. Water sprayed in all directions as he lunged for the ball, triumphant. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, watching with a smile that softened every line of his face. For the first time in years, the weight in his chest felt light. They were no longer soldier and K-9 unit. They were family, and they were home. In the end, Ethan and Shadow's journey reminds us that miracles don't always come dressed in light or thunder. They appear in the quiet moments when love refuses to surrender, when loyalty stands against impossible odds, and when the human spirit chooses faith over fear. Sometimes God doesn't calm the storm around us. He simply gives us the strength or the companion to walk through it. In our everyday lives, whether we face heartbreak, loneliness, or battles no one else can see, may we remember that resilience often begins with a single step forward and a heart that refuses to give up. Hold tight to the ones who stand beside you. Cherish the bonds that pull you back from the edge. And never forget, even in the coldest night, a miracle may already be on its way. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope, hit like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so more people can receive stories of courage, loyalty, and faith. May God bless you, your loved ones, and the loyal companions who walk faithfully beside you every day. Amen.